Today's chat is for anyone who's ever sat in the stillness after loss and wondered who they are now. Grief doesn't come crashing in like we expect it to. It seeps in quietly, rearranging the furniture of your heart when you're not looking. It's not something you ever get over. It's something you grow around. And over time, it changes the way you see the world. What matters, what doesn't, how deeply you love, and how gently you move through your days. So if you're walking through grief right now, whether your loss is fresh or long ago, I hope this chat finds you where you are. This is how grief quietly changes us. Welcome. Come on in, get comfy, and let's sit for a while. There's something I've been thinking about, something that's difficult to describe unless you've felt it yourself. Grief. Not just as a moment or a period of time, but as something that changes you. Because when we think about grief, we often imagine it as something obvious. Something that shows itself clearly. Sadness, tears, a feeling that's easy to recognise. But often it's not like that. Sometimes it's much quieter. It can show up in small, unexpected moments, in the way something reminds you and lingers a little longer than it used to, in the way certain places or conversations feel different now, in the way that something that once felt familiar no longer quite feels the same, and you might not always connect it immediately to what you've lost, but it's there, because grief doesn't just sit alongside your life, it becomes part of it. It changes how you see things, how you experience things, even how you move through ordinary moments. And perhaps one of the most difficult parts is realising that there isn't a way to go back. So you have to go on. When I lost my 15-year-old daughter, I remember thinking how big it was. That might seem a strange thing to say, but to me, it was something that I couldn't shake for a long time. I just kept thinking, this is huge. It's too big to cope with. But over the following months and years, I did learn to cope with it. It wasn't easy, of course. It never is. But if you just keep taking one tiny step at a time, it is possible to move forward. Grief doesn't always arrive the way we think it will. And at first, we don't even realise what's happened. We're just standing there, in the same house, in the same body, but the air feels different, heavier somehow, like the world has shifted a few degrees and no one else has noticed. People tell us what to expect, the stages, the emotions, the clichés, but no one tells us about the silence. That thick, humming stillness that fills the space after the phone stops ringing, after the cards have been tucked away, after everyone else's life quietly clicks back into place. It's not the loud sobbing moments that undo us. It's the still ones, the empty chair, the half-heard laugh you think you catch in another room, the way time feels both endless and meaningless. It's strange, isn't it, how the world keeps spinning. You stand there feeling like everything's stopped, and yet the post still arrives, the neighbours still mow their lawns, the kettle still whistles. There's almost something shocking about how normal everything looks when your world has fallen apart. You want to stop strangers in the street and say, Don't you see? Everything's changed. But of course they don't. And so quietly you start learning how to exist in a world that no longer matches the one inside you. In the early days, people are kind. They mean it when they say, take all the time you need. But time, it turns out, is a tricky thing. You start to feel like you should be doing better by now, like you should have reached some invisible milestone of recovery. But grief doesn't run on a schedule. There's no better by now. There's just this. The slow, unglamorous process of continuing to breathe, to eat, to sleep, and sometimes that's enough. I think one of the hardest parts of grief is how lonely it feels, even when you're surrounded by love, because loss is personal. It's private in a way that's hard to explain. No one else lost your person, your story, your history. But here's the truth that time slowly teaches. Even in that aloneness, you are not truly alone. There's a whole silent fellowship of people walking their own paths through grief. And somehow, without words, you start to recognize one another. Grief changes the way you notice things. You start to see life in sharper contrasts. The beauty, the fragility, the moments that used to blur together. There's often a quiet awareness of before and after, not always spoken, but felt, in the way memories carry a different weight, in the way certain thoughts arrive unexpectedly, and in the way something inside you knows that things are no longer quite the same. And unlike many things in life, grief doesn't move in a straight line. It doesn't follow a clear timeline. There isn't a moment where it neatly resolves. Some days feel lighter, others feel heavier again without warning. And that unpredictability can be difficult to understand. But over time, what becomes more noticeable is not just the feeling of grief itself, but how it begins to change you. In the way you respond to things, in the way you notice what matters, in the way your priorities begin to shift. Because grief is not only about what we've lost, it's also about how that loss reshapes us, quietly, gradually, in ways we don't always expect. As time moves forward, grief doesn't always leave, but it begins to change shape. Not disappearing, but settling differently within you. It can feel isolating, because not everything you're experiencing is easy to explain. There aren't always the right words, and sometimes it feels easier to keep it to yourself. Not because you want to be distant, but because what you're feeling doesn't always translate easily. You are learning how to live with the change. Because once you've lost something irreplaceable, you start to understand how precious the ordinary really was all along. There's a gentleness that comes, eventually. Not right away, but slowly, like dawn breaking after a long night. The tears still come, but they soften. They stop feeling like drowning and start feeling like remembering. And in those moments, when the ache meets the love, you start to realise you're not broken, you're being remade. That's the part no one tells you at the beginning. That grief isn't only about loss, it's about transformation. Not the kind you ask for, or the kind you want, but the kind that quietly changes the way you see the world, and eventually the way you see yourself. It's not a change you choose. It just happens. The way the tide reshapes a shoreline. Subtle, relentless, invisible until you look back one day and think, I don't quite recognise who I was before all this. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we're not meant to stay the same after loss. Because when someone you love is gone, the world itself feels different, like the colours have shifted. The light falls differently through the window. Everything familiar has been rearranged, and you find yourself relearning the simplest things. How to eat dinner alone. How to make plans for one instead of two. How to feel joy without guilt. Grief, I found, is a quiet teacher. It has this way of stripping life back to its essentials, showing you what truly matters and what never really did. The petty worries lose their grip. The constant striving, the keeping up, the pretending, it all starts to feel faintly ridiculous. And in their place, something humbler takes root. You start craving sincerity over sparkle, peace over perfection, moments over milestones. You realise that life was never about the grand gestures, but the small, everyday kindnesses that hold it together. There's a tenderness that begins to grow where the ache once was. It's not that you stop missing them. You never do. It's that the missing becomes gentler, more woven into your being. You start to remember without flinching. You can look at their photo without breaking, and sometimes you even find yourself smiling. Not because the pain is gone, but because the love is still there. That's the quiet magic of time. It doesn't erase grief. It softens the edges until love and loss can sit in the same room together. You start to see grief in other people too. In the woman clutching her shopping list a little too tightly. In the man at the cafe staring into his coffee a few seconds longer than usual. And suddenly you understand them in a way you couldn't before. Because once you've walked through loss, you start recognising the small signs of heartbreak in others. You learn that everyone is carrying something. And that gentleness isn't weakness, it's wisdom earned through pain. Grief also changes your relationship with time. Before, it stretched endlessly. All plans and possibilities. Now, it feels more fragile, more precious. You stop saying someday. You say today, or soon, or while I still can. You start keeping the good china on the table, lighting the candles just because, calling the friend you've been meaning to call. Loss has a way of making life urgent, not in a panicked way, but in a quietly grateful one. You realise how fleeting it all is, and instead of fearing that, you start to honour it. And then there's love. The strange, complicated way it keeps growing even when the person is gone. It lingers, reshapes itself, finds new ways to exist. Sometimes it shows up as a habit you can't break, talking to them while you cook, reaching for the second mug out of instinct. Sometimes it shows up as a sudden calm, a sense that they're near in a way that you've absorbed their love so deeply it still colours the way you see the world. They're gone, and yet they're not. They live in how you speak, how you laugh, how you notice the same beauty they once did. That's how grief quietly changes you. It doesn't take love away. It teaches you new ways to carry it. And maybe that's the softest truth of all. You don't move on from grief, you move with it. Like a scar that still aches when the weather changes, it stays with you. Not to hurt, but to remind you that you loved deeply, and that love still shapes who you're becoming. There comes a point, and it doesn't happen all at once, when the sharp edges of grief begin to round. It's subtle. You don't notice it on the day it happens. But one morning you realise that you've laughed, really laughed, and for a second you forgot to feel guilty about it. You realise you've gone a whole day without crying, or that you've started looking forward to something again. A meal, a walk, a visit, a future that once felt impossible. That's not forgetting, that's healing in its own quiet way. No one tells you how gradual healing really is. It's not like in the movies where there's a single moment of closure. In real life, it's more like the tide. In, out, sometimes calm, sometimes crashing. You don't get over a loss. You grow around it, like ivy curling around a stone, and eventually the green outweighs the grey. The ache is still there, but it no longer rules the day. Somewhere along the way, you stop fighting the sadness. You make space for it instead. You realise it's not the enemy. It's proof of how deeply you loved. And love, even in its absence, has a strange kind of endurance. It keeps shaping you. It keeps reminding you what really matters. Grief teaches you to notice again and to cherish what remains. Sometimes people will tell you that grief makes you stronger, and maybe that's true in some ways. But I think it makes you softer first. It takes away your certainties, your armour, and leaves you with an open heart that bruises easily, but also loves more honestly. You become less impressed by perfection and more moved by sincerity. You stop pretending you're fine. You stop expecting others to be too. And suddenly, connection feels deeper. You start listening with your whole self. You start showing up in ways that feel more real. That's how grief quietly changes you. It takes away what's false and leaves behind only what's true. There's a grace that comes with acceptance, not the kind that says, "I'm over it," but the kind that whispers, "I can hold this now and still live fully." You learn to smile while carrying your sorrow, to laugh without betraying your loss, to hold joy and grief in the same hand, and to understand they were never opposites after all. In time, and only in time, you begin to make peace with the person you've become. Someone changed, yes, but also deepened. Someone who knows how fragile everything is, and yet still chooses to love anyway. That's the quiet triumph of grief. Not that it disappears, but that it transforms you into someone that can see beauty even through tears. You know, grief has a strange way of softening us, even when it feels like it's breaking us. It strips away all the small talk of life and leaves us face to face with what's real: love, kindness, connection, time. It changes you, yes, but maybe not into something smaller, maybe into something deeper. If you're still learning how to live alongside your loss, be patient with yourself. You're not supposed to rush this. Grief is not a sign that you're weak. It's proof that you loved, deeply, honestly, without reservation. And that's nothing to regret. So take your time, breathe, find your way back, one small kindness at a time. And when you're ready, let the world back in. Not the same as before, but gentler, more aware, and still, somehow, full of love. If you feel comfortable sharing, I'd love to ask, what has grief changed for you? Thank you for sharing your time with me today. Take gentle care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.